Okay, great afternoon, everyone. We want to give another 30 seconds to get everyone engaged as they're entering our meeting. Okay, we're going to start on time and end on time. Others will join us. We'll catch them up as they come in. But hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you to this training regarding engaging traumatized students in your classrooms and schools. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Grant, CEO of Monument Academy Public Charter School in Washington, D.C., a weekday boarding school with a mission to empower students, particularly those who have experienced significant adversity. As well, I'm on the board of the Trauma-Informed Educators Community of Practice, which is hosting this content and seeks to increase the number of schools and educators who are implementing effective trauma-informed education practices. But first, I want to hear from you. Please let us know what work you do and how much your school is engaged in trauma by responding to these two poll questions. Also, we want to see your smiling faces, everybody. We know it's Tuesday, it's early in the week, but we love to see the faces. So if you can, and we know how much fun it is to present to an engaged class, we would love to see your video and have you smiling back at us. And at the end of each speaker's remarks, we have time for Q&A. So please unmute yourselves then and ask your questions, and we'll be sure to answer them. So at this time, one more request to please let us see your beautiful smiling faces on this Tuesday. Monument, our mission is to take in children who, well, I don't want to say they suffer, but suffering isn't there. But they are experiencing trauma. They may be going into the child welfare system. They may already be in the child welfare system. And we want to give them a space and a platform for them to be successful. We want to provide them with the tools for them to be quality adults, to live great lives. But we also want to create a community that supports the staff who has to work with the children, who has chosen to work with these children. So we also have to support them in this work, because the work we know can be difficult and challenging, but it is extremely rewarding. Our model, as you can see up here, we have multiple strategies and practices that we utilize to support our students. 71.5% of our students are at risk. Another 50% have an IEP. We do have small class sizes, so that's one of our resources and one of our strategies that we utilize. We do not exceed 15 students per class. We have at least 2 adults in every class. We have a behavior team that focuses strictly on behavior. We also have a counseling team, which is led by our chief, Danielle Nelson. You'll hear from her very soon. And we have a daily advisory program that lets our students reflect and plan for their practices. And we also have a dialectical behavior therapy program implemented here that is utilized to actually address and support our students, staff, and parents. And you'll hear more about that. So at this time, I would like to introduce our principal, Dr. Ashley DeCruz, who runs the daytime program, and I'll speak later to the evening program. Dr. DeCruz?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start off with what we see as trauma, okay? And if you can't hear me, please go ahead and unmute or put in the chat so I can ensure that you can hear me as we go through this presentation. So when we look at trauma, we see it as a physiological or a psychological response to any deeply upsetting or threatening situation. And I like to tell our educators that these situations can have a myriad of reasons. It could be child abuse, it could be neglect, and it can also be like a serious car wreck, excuse me. One thing that I always tell our educators is it's important to know how repeated trauma can affect the brain of our scholars. So that repeated trauma and that chronic adversity puts our students on high alert. They're consistently looking to see what is going to happen next. They're looking for that next threat. And when our students are hypervigilant, they seem to overreact to what we may consider neutral events. So think about that student that you've had in your classroom and you've asked them to simply turn in an assignment and they go and they throw a desk. Now to you, you're wondering what caused them to overreact. That could be a manifestation of them responding to their trauma. And so as we go through this program, I want us to talk about the importance of trauma-informed teaching. And so I wanted to take a moment to put us in that lens of what our trauma-based students may face. And you can put your answer in the chat. Take a moment to think of the most traumatic experience that you've ever had in your entire life. And immediately after that experience, you're forced to go to work and you have to complete a very stringent deadline. Now, all of us are educators, so going to work can already be stressful as is, but couple that with the most traumatic experience as well. You go to work, none of your coworkers know what you've just dealt with, and none of your supervisors know what you've dealt with. And they're continuously asking you for assistance with completing tasks, not knowing where your emotional regulation is. How would you respond? I know me, I wouldn't make it. It would be something that would be very difficult to me. I would not know how to communicate that effectively. And my actions would probably be uncharacteristic to my typical personality, which is very outgoing, right? But I wouldn't know how to effectively communicate that to my stakeholders. That is what our students that have experienced trauma face daily when they come into the school setting. And so when I'm talking to educators, I always like to tell them that when you're thinking about trauma-informed teaching, it starts with an understanding. Trauma doesn't just affect learning, it also affects a student's behavior. And so when you come with that understanding, it allows for you to say, okay, what is my student's behavior trying to tell me? It's more than just them having that emotional outburst. What is the level of communication that they're trying to tell me, right? And when you have that understanding, it allows for you to reflect on your teaching practices so that you can be better with supporting them as they're experiencing trauma. And the great thing about trauma-informed teaching is that you may be the first individual in that student's life that has taken that moment to say, what am I trying to get from that student and what are they trying to get from me? So one thing that is important to note is that trauma does not typically just start that first year you've had them, right? Most times students have faced trauma for multiple and previous years, and it's gone unchecked so long that students are just seen as that student, right? That student that just has that reputation for having those behavior issues. Oh, that kid doesn't want to do it. They want to come into school. They want to be disruptive. But one thing that I tell my teachers all the time is that students that can will. That means that no student just comes into school and says, today is going to be the day I'm going to hijack the classroom, right? Today is going to be the day I'm going to go to that teacher and I'm going to say, I'm not going to do your work. I'm going to make your class as disruptive as possible. They're trying to communicate that with us. However, most time a student that is traumatized is not going to tell you, hey, such and such, I'm dealing with something, right? Because they haven't or they may not have been able to learn the best ways to share those feelings and share those emotions. And so on the next slide, I'm going to tell you some ways of what that may look like in the classroom so that we're better prepared to support our students' emotional needs simultaneously while supporting their educational needs. So I always start this off with, these are potential signs of trauma. Now, this does not automatically mean that there is trauma with the student because some of these behaviors could be linked with another myriad of factors, such as a medical condition. It could be anxiety or learning or thinking differences. But take a moment to think about that student that you have in your school or your classroom. And when you look at these behaviors, do you see that quite frequently from a student with no explainable response or reason? I know as I was writing this presentation, unfortunately, a lot of students came to mind where I'm like, why do they have overreactions to everyday challenges? Or Why does it seem like they're always aggressive? They have those negative outbursts. It's always out of the cruise. I got to go to the nurse. My stomach is hurting. My head is hurting, or I'm very melancholy. I'm very sad. We're on the field trip and that student is off to the side, not engaging with everyone else. They're just appearing very sad. Think about that student that comes into the classroom and the first thing that they do is take and hijack your whole lesson, right? They're having those inappropriate social interactions. And in your head, you're probably thinking, man, why do they come in every class and hijack my classroom? It's not because they're intentionally trying to, it's that they're struggling with appropriate social interactions, right? Additionally, a potential sign of trauma can just be them simply having a concern with focusing, organization, and self-regulation. So they're in class and they're trying their very best to focus, but it's just not something that they can do, because when a student is exposed to trauma quite frequently, it delays the development of their brain. So again, students that can will, students that can't will not, right? And so they're going to fall behind. They're going to have those overreactions. And so I move on to some of the ways that we at Monument Academy engage our traumatized students in the classroom, because unfortunately we deal with a very huge population of students that have experienced some type of trauma in their life. And the biggest thing that I tell our teachers day one is set those clear boundaries, because again, going back to the first slide that I shared, traumatized students are typically on high alert. They're looking for what may happen next, that next level of threat. And so they need to understand that the expectations resonate for all of the students, so that hopefully that can kind of minimize the level of stress that they may have. Next, and I know that Ms. Nelson will talk more about it, I say, understand your triggers. I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that it is very easy to deal with a student that is traumatized, because sometimes it may trigger you. And so one thing that we do at our school is that we actually have our staff complete the ACE survey. I want you to kind of take that moment and say, like, what are my triggers? How has my childhood affected me and how I interact with my peers or how I interact with my students? The biggest thing is, does your ego come into play? When you're interacting with them, are you working with them to solve a problem, or are you working with them to win the problem? So does your ego come into play? And as I've said throughout this presentation, is understanding that behavior is a form of communication. It's not a typical communication style that we use, but it is one that traumatized students are most often comfortable with, right? So why are they refusing to make eye contact? What does that mean for them? Or why are they exploding when they're redirected? What does it mean when they run out of the room when confronted? Those are atypical for us, but they're typical for our students that have been exposed to trauma. Again, do a temperature check with students. So when they're coming in day one, say, what is your experience with math? What is your experience with school? This year, we had 60 new students, and 60 new students coming into a school, you're getting all levels of behavior, right? So we had to kind of just take a temperature check and say, what is your experience with school been? What are your typical behaviors? Or how are you used to adults responding to you? Because letting us know how you're used to adults responding with you allows us to say, okay, what can we do differently to kind of take them off of that high alert? And then just being mindful of the days of the week. So we are a residential program, and so we get our students from Sunday to Friday. So Mondays are always going to be tough for us, because we know that our students have gone back into the same situations that have introduced that trauma to them. And Thursdays are a high level of behavior infractions for us, because students are starting to have that anxiety about knowing that they're going back into the neighborhoods where trauma may be occurring. When we look at proactively preparing your school, the biggest thing is giving your staff a platform to voice their emotions. We got to talk about it so that your staff feels supported. So allow for them to talk about how they are addressing it and what it looks like for them, or what it feels like for them. I'm not going to go through all of these, because again, Ms. Nelson is going to share a little bit more about it. But something else that we do with our students and our staff are community meetings, right? We want our traumatized students to be exposed to proactive practices when dealing with things that may resonate with them in a negative manner. All right. Again, these are some more steps to talk about proactively preparing your classroom. Biggest thing, give them an opportunity to reflect on their feelings, emotions, and experience. So we start our program off with an advisory block where it's just simply, hey, how was your night? Or, hey, how are you feeling? Let's talk about it. What are some of the skills that you can utilize today when you feel that you're on high alert or when you're feeling anxious? That gives those students a voice and allows them to know that their feelings and opinions matter. Reassurance. It seems so simple, but it can be a huge change. Empathy is the best emotional regulator. All right. Next, we talk about allowing for flexibility. It's nothing for you to come into our school and our classroom, and you may see a student that's working underneath their desk. If that is in a unique space that's going to allow for them to be proactive, allow for them to do it. It doesn't have to be so rigid, because we as adults need a little bit of flexibility. So be willing to be flexible with your students. And then mediations to address conflict. We don't just say, oh, you know what, you did something wrong, we're going to suspend you, we're going to give you a behavior contract, or we're going to give you some type of negative consequence. Let's talk about the mediations, because typically students that have been exposed to trauma, they don't know how to address conflict in a positive and healthy way. And so we're giving them those opportunities to say, it's okay to disagree. Now, what can we do differently in the future? Again, some more ways to proactively prepare your classroom: model it. And when I say model it, don't be afraid to kind of take that step back when you feel that you are being triggered. It should never be because I said so. That's not going to be beneficial to everyone. Again, that goes back to that slide of, is your ego coming into play? Another thing that I always like to tell my teachers is, let them have their moments. Sometimes they're not ready to talk about it, right? If you know that you're upset and your boss came to you and said, right now you need to tell me why you did this, most times you're not going to be in that moment. So understand that they may not be ready to have that moment to express themselves, and it's okay to give them a few more minutes before having them engage. And then don't take their outbursts personally. It's going to happen. Again, this is something that they've been exposed to for years prior to you having them. And so they're going to have those outbursts. So don't take it personal. Allow for them to understand that it happened. It was a moment, and then we're going to move on from there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Nelson.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Danielle Nelson, the Chief of Wellbeing at Monument Academy Public Charter School, and I am happy to talk more in depth about our interventions and strategies that we employ with our students who definitely have been exposed and who experience trauma. So as we came back to school in person, we had to focus on prevention, intervention, stability, and recovery. Especially during the pandemic, we just noticed an increase of anxiety and depressive symptoms. So we wanted to make sure we had a multi-tiered system of support framework at Monument Academy. We expanded that framework to include, of course, restorative justice circles that may look like structured mediation, family support, parent counseling, also really building out a robust staff wellness program. So with our multi-tiered system of support, it allows us to give our students the universal strategies, which is our school-wide SEL program, social and emotional learning program, which is guided by our dialectical behavior therapy skills training group. And then we focus on our small group counseling, and then of course our individual counseling. So you will see in that framework, we are able to manage our students who are in crisis and build strong relationships. So to expand on that staff wellness initiative, we wanted to make sure our staff professional development trainings were intentional and really focusing on trauma-informed care practices and cultural awareness and responsive techniques. So what we also added, we added a trauma-informed book club, just for an example. So as Dr. DeCruz said, our principal, she stated, given the staff that space to understand their own triggers, completing their ACE survey so they can understand their cultural background, how it manifests in the workplace. And we found that to be a very effective initiative for some of our staff members. And so we are happy to see that we're having these complex conversations and we're able to use evidence-based practices, if you will, such as the ACE survey that's been around forever. In addition to that, we want to make sure we take the time to assess our students before we're actually working with them in the classroom. So many of our students have a variety of assessments that they complete. May it be the ACE survey, as we mentioned. We also assess for anxiety, depression, we do parent screenings, we do dialectical behavior therapy assessments, which are administered twice a year, beginning of the year and end of the year. So all along the way, we are assessing the well-being of our staff and our students. We also complete the well-being surveys administered by Empower K-12. So we're along the way, understanding your students, you have to assess the need, assess the root cause of the trauma, but also knowing that a part of the relationship is assessing the staff who's working with the students. So you'll see a great emphasis on our staff professional development and how we're working with our staff. Another intervention that we employ here is just making sure we cross-collaborate across departments. So that has to be a structured time. You can't just say, you know what, I think it's time for us to meet with the academics team. It has to be structured, frequent, and predictable. We have to know this is on our schedule. We meet as a team. We are a data-driven school, so we do want to understand what our students are presenting to us so we can meet, talk, and deliver quality services. I will say we are proud to meet as a team quite often. We know our students' IEPs, their individualized education plans, their behavior intervention plans, their safety contracts, or any other plan we're putting in place. So we're meeting, we're talking, we're definitely doing some case conferencing. That helps make sure we can manage our students in crisis. We also work with other agencies such as CHAMPS, which is our mobile crisis unit, Children's National Medical Center, the Psychiatric Institute of Washington, and our suicide prevention line. Of course, we work with all of our core service agencies under the Department of Behavioral Health to make sure we are giving those wraparound services to all of our students and families in need. Lastly, you'll hear a lot about our DBT program. We're very proud of. It's been implemented here over the school years, and we are seeing momentum building. We're getting traction, and our students are learning the language and the skills to self-regulate. One key component to the DBT skills program is the journaling, and we call it our diary card. So every evening, outside of the advisory that our students participate in, they're able to journal their feelings about their day, their experiences, and every counselor has access to it so we can immediately respond the next day or in the moment. And a lot of students are getting really comfortable even letting us know if they're in a suicidal space, if they're spiraling, if they're cycling. So we have to make sure we get the wraparound support to them immediately. One thing that I will stress, build that connection with your families. We're going to get into that soon, but that has been a bonus. And because we are a boarding school, we get to have that wraparound support. So next slide, please. Few more strategies. I know there are a lot, but we have seen these things work. We want to make sure our spaces are calming. So I would say we have dedicated a wellness space for our students and our staff. So I always tell our counselors, a regulated space is an intervention. If you have a calming environment, then our students can self-regulate more and they can have that safe space to reflect. Committing to understanding our students, again, that's that big chunk of assessments that I will encourage you all to do so you can understand your students who are faced with trauma. It's just quickly do an assessment of their needs and how you can match the intervention and strategy with those needs. Role playing is very effective. Of course, you will see a lot of the counselors and the behavior specialists doing this type of strategy in session, but it allows our students to practice how to manage their emotions. So when those real scenarios or real moments come, they can have that practice with that skill. Consistently focusing on DBT skills. Of course, this is a mouthful, but DBT comes as a package program. Our students get to practice mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. So we use this program because it works. And our students love the fact that they know the skills, they have the language, and it could be quick, consistent language that you want to use so you can easily redirect your students in the moment. Assessing the root cause of the crisis. And I will say this one and learning the chain analysis goes hand in hand. So we teach our students how to do the flow of ABC charts. So knowing the antecedent, knowing the behaviors, knowing the consequences. So getting your staff and students on board with that consistent language helps. And it allows our students to visually see what came before the crisis. You know, how can we manage things proactively instead of reacting all the time? Another strategy that is effective is be a consistent source of validation without judgment. So build those relationships so you can become a trusted adult, and that can look like you're in the role of a mentor and not just the educator, not just a counselor, but really taking on a life skill approach with our students and our families. And the last intervention I wanted to share that is very helpful and effective is just creating that staff wellness platform so your staff can have the space to debrief and process work-related stressors, learn about their own mental health resources, assess their effectiveness of their coping strategies and self-care plans. And this actually helps us monitor vicarious trauma and burnout and keep that relationship strong with our students. That has been a big win for us this year. I'm happy that we are on board to know that staff wellness is at the forefront of even our students' well-being. So we're really seeing that strong connection between our students and staff because we are paying attention to the staff's well-being, and that helps us mitigate any other issue that may be going on in the building with our students. And that is all I have as far as effective interventions and strategies so you can help a child in crisis and build a strong relationship.
Before we proceed, I'll encourage you to actually ask these two outstanding leaders, query them, ask them clarifying questions, because before we proceed, I will talk about what it means to have that staff. So I really want you to grill them to see where their minds are, to see how they feel and how it impacts them as the chief of well-being and as the school's principal, and what it means to lead their department. So please, I'll pause right here and we'll look at the raise your hand, or we'll look at the chat for questions.
All right. I read in the chat, is there a link for the DBT program? I can definitely put that resource out. We use the skills training DBT Steps A, and that's for the skills training for emotional problem solving for adolescents. I can drop that link in the chat so you can have that resource book, because it does come with a textbook and it is so helpful. But I will get that for you now.
Thank you.
Okay, examples of role play. So we typically pick scenarios that's common to our students' age and stage of development. So it could be a conflict with a peer, say in a common area, say the lunchroom, or at recess, or in a classroom. And so we would just have our counselors or even our behavior specialists be a peer, and that student kind of walk through like what they would typically do as a response, and then what's the most preferred reaction after we go through some processing. So you can pick scenarios, or you can use a lot of the resources. We have this cue card that's called Chill Skills, and it's for emotional problem solving. And so it actually gives scenarios that you can act out with your students. It's very, very fun in a group setting, because then you can have the students play different roles, but it's just giving them examples of typical things they're going to be confronted with in the school setting. May it be classroom, or like we said, we are a boarding school, so it could be in their student life department. And then we have them act out, of course, how it typically goes, and then what's the most preferred emotional response for that. And then we have a teachable moment and process those responses. The ACE survey is definitely available online, and you just want to type in adverse childhood experiences, and you do want to get the background information of how it was created, and the link to physical health and how it impacts a student or a child's physical health. And so just looking at their trajectory over time and how trauma affected physical health as well as mental health. And then there are numerous TED Talks around the ACE survey and how it manifests. And I think it's very important, as you even work with your parents, to educate them at the same time about their ACE experiences, their adverse childhood experiences, and how it affected their parenting. We're starting to see that we need to do a lot of work around the inner child, healing the inner child for our parents, and how it's showing up as they are parenting their adolescents. So it's so many resources, and I will definitely put that link in the chat as well.
Okay, everyone. I want to thank Dr. DeCruz and Mrs. Nelson for sharing the strategies and practices that fall under the technical heading, but they also fall under the adaptive mindset heading. Whereas if you don't acknowledge that there are children who are in crisis, there are families that are in crisis, you will not implement any of these strategies or practices with fidelity. So before we go into how we support our families, I have to interject with making sure that going back to our mission statement, that the right people are placed in front of our children. You cannot, with a good heart and with the right mindset, place people who are going to trigger our children, who are not going to love and respect our children in front of our children. So that falls on me and my leadership team. We ensure that we acknowledge where our staff members are as soon as they arrive in my building. There are two questions that I utilize when I'm interviewing. And the first one is, do you come to work every day? Now, again, things happen. Life happens. But I have to be supportive in that time to ensure that they feel respected as well, and they feel valued. I'm talking about my staff. And I follow up that question with, do you love children? And I'll look at their responses in their eyes. I don't expect to hear it in their voices. I look in their eyes as I ask them, because the eyes speak volumes. And if their eyes light up, you can see it, you can read it right then. Because the only way you're going to be able to support children who have been traumatized is to actually love them and respect them. So it is up to me to ensure that all persons who are being paid, emphasis on being paid, to support my babies, have to come here with the mindset that they're going to love my babies in the good times and the bad. Because too many of my babies are coming in here going through bad times. It's not always about getting them to master the standards on ELA, mathematics, social studies and science, art, the other electives, or the other subjects. It's coming here to get them a right mindset so that you can master these standards. Everybody's not coming here ready-made. I borrowed a label, I like to put, that I utilize for children. I borrowed it from Yvette Jackson. She wrote a book called Pedagogy of Confidence. And the label is not at risk, it's school dependent. These babies are school dependent. So before I even start talking about how we support our parents and guardians, we have to acknowledge that centuries have created communities. Over the centuries, we've created communities of traumatized people. So they're coming in here with triggers, generational. So it's been handed down. Trauma's been handed down generation to generation. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we're going to fail from the giddy up. So Monument Academy Student and Family Engagement Department, also known as SAFE. We did that by design. Student and Family Engagement, SAFE. Our SAFE team, we foster and promote the healthy families through the formation of healthy bonds and intentional parent education opportunities, intentional. Meaning that as soon as our parents come, our staff members, but those who are trained in the practice, contact our parents one-on-one and not just have them create, or complete an ACEs survey through a form. They're asked questions orally, verbally, It might be through a Zoom call, sometimes on the phone, sometimes face to face. Let us know where you are, mom. Let us know where you are, dad. Let us know where you are, grandma. Because again, these children may not have mom or dad. And the grandparents are the ones raising. Auntie, foster parent. Let us know where you are so then we know where to begin with you. Because you say we're a residential boarding school, but these kids still come back home to them or go back home to them on breaks, weekend breaks, spring breaks, holiday breaks, our shortened summer break. And I'll talk to that about the shortened summer break in a second. So we have to acknowledge where our families are and the family dynamics, but we don't just do it that one time, we do it often. We do home visits. We're the student support team where we reach out to parents. What do you need? What do you need? Not just in terms of the mental support, but what do you need physical support? We have to make sure that you can eat, that our children can eat, that the lights are on. What do you need to keep you in a healthy mental space? We then have to identify what do you need to heal emotionally. So when we get you there, that then you don't keep transferring your trauma onto our babies. Again, it's the staff has to know this if you want to work in Monument Academy. There's work to be done there. Know who your families are, know whom you're serving. So I'm speaking to these families and my staff members simultaneously. And then we do the meet me halfway, where we identify where they are, learn the staff. I have to let y'all laugh. Yes, I trademarked this statement, but I did trademark it. Learn the child, then teach. Learn the staff, then lead. You can't do it. You can't do it when you don't know where everybody is. And I mean that. If you don't put in that work, you're doomed to failure. The conversations around the breakfast and dinner tables differ from household to household, differ from community to community. In some households, the kids are still learning in the morning, in the evening when they come home, on the weekends, on the summer breaks, they're still learning. But guess what? For school-dependent kids, that learning stops when they leave out, well, when they walk out our doors. So again, we have to keep engaging families. We do it through our trimester-based family nights. We make sure that they know the content, make sure that they know the strategies and practices that they can implement. Engage your families, wrap your arms around them as well, simultaneously as you wrap your arms around the kids. And then we also provide camps for them, for the children. So on our breaks, we don't just keep the kids at home with the family. On our breaks, we've created engagement camps and we pay our staff members additional for the kid to come in and provide transportation to and fro, to come and engage in activities that interest the student. You're supporting the family by keeping the child safe, and you're supporting the child by then engaging them in their interests. Also, we have the parent portal and the band where we can communicate constantly. And trust and believe, just because the children go home on the weekend does not mean that we are not there. Our phones ring, our text messages ping, and we are still engaged. And even when they leave here after 8th grade, because we are a middle school, 5th through 8th grade, we are still heavily engaged with our families once they leave here 8th grade. And yes, they're chomping at the bit for when we open the high school. Our kids are our kids forever. This is a huge deal, time on task. So looking at our calendar, we know that traumatized kids need to be safe, secure environments. We're in Washington, D.C., and unfortunately, many of our neighborhoods and communities are not safe. You have children walking through gauntlets of drug dealers, criminals, people who are or maybe strung out have an alcohol dependency. And we have to shield our children from some of these entities or components that permeate our neighborhoods. So we had to create a calendar that keeps them safe. Where the traditional schools have a mandated 180, we have a mandated 190 with an additional 15 to 20 days where we keep them in our school. We can keep our kids here up to 200, 215 days, and we do. We do. So the calendar is important. And we have to make sure we strategically engage our children so that the practices that we utilize to get them to a particular space, that they don't lose them. That 2 to 3 month summer break is real. That's real. That can actually destroy your culture. You spend the first advisory on a traditional school year, we hear your fourth grading advisory. You spend the whole first one getting them reacclimated to what you spent the previous year doing. So now we've shortened our summer and we put in intermittent breaks, reminding you that I also have to give that attention to my staff to make sure they have an opportunity to heal. So we've created a trimester calendar. So again, what we do is give those intermittent breaks with supports, engaging the community, as Mrs. Nelson shared, using our teachers to support them, as Dr. DeCruz shared. Supporting them, we give them additional funds. They want to take care of their families if they want to work engagement week. So our calendar is real. Quality time on task is a proven strategy. And we have to make sure that we identify best practices, not get handcuffed or stuck to an agrarian model that is obsolete, that was built for certain people and only works for certain people. Let's get out of that mindset that we have to have a particular calendar because of what was used 150 years ago. Please, everybody, let's rethink how we do education for all children. Please look at the calendar, absorb it. If you have any questions, I'm right here. Let me know what you think of what I do and ask me questions on how I can help you. The mics are open. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. For those of you who do not have control of that calendar, tell me what you feel that you could actually do to engage children, to give them additional time with you. Remember, our practices are grounded in the conceptual framework, symbolic interactionism, as well as proximal process. Symbolic interactionism is Max Weber, George Herbert Mead, where we know that if you are within striking distance or right there, you're modeling your expectations. So again, we are giving an example or exemplars for our children and our children and our families to learn from. Proximal process means that they're right there. They hear us speak. They see how we move, and we can give them feedback in real time. Those are real strategies and practices, because again, we utilize the adaptive mindset to change behaviors.
Everyone, feel free to unmute yourself or ask your question in the chat.
And also, Dr. DeCruz and Ms. Nelson, if there's anything you'd like to add at this time, I can always mute and you can unmute if anything you'd like to add what I added to it. While you are giving me more time, you know, I can do this for like 3 or 4 days. So just letting you know, you give me more time to speak. Trauma is not new. The pandemic only pulled the curtain back. Trauma has been going on in our communities for centuries. I am just not glad for the pandemic, but I'm happy now that we are forced to address it across the board. All of our nation was impacted or traumatized by a pandemic. There have been societal pandemics ongoing for decades and centuries. So we have to get into a mindset that trauma is here. Sometimes it's hidden by design from others, or sometimes it's hidden by families by design because they don't want you to know or they don't trust you to support. So again, we have to do what we must do in order to ensure that our children grow up to be healthy adults, able to take care of themselves and their families and not transfer that trauma onto their offspring and let that generational cycle continue.
Dr. Grant, it strikes me that Monument Academy is a pioneer in this work in trauma-informed education, and you all have a lot of resources that other schools just don't have. Are there any things that you want to highlight in terms of how they can deal with both their staff stress level? Because we're asking a lot of teachers who don't have these additional support systems in place. So first for staff, and then for their students, and just also to reiterate the point that this focus on trauma really does impact learning, because the brain is really not in a place to learn when it is exposed to toxic stress. So anything you care to share about that?
Yes, and I'm definitely going to hand it the mic off in 2 seconds, well, a little more than two, to my compadres here. As far as staff is concerned, if you are not willing to acknowledge that life happens for everybody, then you're going to fail. And you totally keep your eyes focused on that quantitative data around achievement, then you're going to fail your staff members and you're going to have high turnover. So what is important? Well, and then when you have high turnover, you can't build those relationships that are required to actually get those babies to believe in you and be willing to take you, to grab your hand and go with you on that journey. Now, that means that you have to pay very close attention to your team. And then, and I know that this one's a big deal, sometimes you have to play that role and fight the powers that be who solely want to focus on quantitative data. I love giving the gift of time. That's one of my go-tos. Everybody's not coming into your school as a student operating at the same level. So I support my teachers in terms of holding a child accountable and not being afraid to share with the parent, hey, we're giving a gift of time. We're not being punitive. We want to make sure that this child is going to be a quality adult who's able to get a job, access healthcare benefits, and produce and provide for the community. So you look at your calendar, you look at intermittent breaks for staff to actually de-escalate and heal and re-energize. You actually ask them, where are you right now? Come here, talk to me. What can I do for you? You actually create a program, as both Dr. DeCruz and Ms. Nelson identified, that lets staff members come in and talk about where they are. Just because we're educators, and this part bothered me during the pandemic more than anything, just because we are educators doesn't mean that we don't have lives as well. We all of a sudden were identified as frontline workers, all of a sudden, where you have denigrated us for so long about, hey, that industry doesn't need this, that industry doesn't need that. No, what we're going to do, we're going to lock our arms together and tell everybody, hey, we are human too, and we have lives and families that we must take care of. And you create a system and a platform that allows them to actually heal, and then you give them that support, and then tell them that they are valued, and you show them multiple ways that you value them. You give them Friday afternoon after school. We call ours the Friday finale. This year in August, we had the block party. In October, we had the, what did I call it? I called the, I know it was the cornhole, it was called the Monument Cornhole Tournament, but I named it something else. What did I call it? Cornament. I call it the Cornament, the Monument Cornament. We had a cornhole tournament with Mr. Cookie came out. We gave out Sundays and chocolate cookie sandwiches. All students had to leave. Friday half day, we had the cornhole tournament in the cafeteria. October, we had sip and paint. We sipped grape juice, okay? That's what we sipped. But we did the sip and paint in the auditorium, and it was very calming. We hired someone to come in, we relaxed, and we painted. And we did raffles during it. We gave away game tickets, we gave away gift cards. and everyone relaxed and bonded. It shows that their value. And then we're going to celebrate our teacher of the year and staff member of the year next week. We have a whole celebration for the holidays. We have to celebrate our successes as well. And evidence is showing that our model works. We have shown tremendous gains. They are embargoed. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, but we've shown tremendous gains in literacy and numeracy, tremendous gains by utilizing these strategies to support students and staff. So again, I truly believe in our practice, and I truly believe in our families, students, and staff members, and they have to know that you care. Would you all like to chime in anything? I'm going to mute. Hold on, let me mute and turn.
All right. I did want to add for the staff wellness initiatives as well. One thing that is helpful, if your school has an identified or an appointed school behavioral health coordinator or someone who can monitor the activities and just the pulse of the staff outside of, your traditional roles as your human resources manager or someone like your EAP counselor, just really have a staff member who can serve as that one person who can monitor the activities, give feedback around the pulse of the morale, really make sure that the entire student staff body or staff team, they're working towards coming together and having team building activities. We had a pop-up luncheon to celebrate our teachers just because you are a great educator, and you need to hear that. We have a self-care workshop coming up soon as we come back in January, just to make sure people feel refreshed and to say, you know what, this is another opportunity to show us your magic. This is a clean slate. We honor our adults and our students together. We have mediations between our teachers, between our staff members and our students. So if we know that a student may complain about an adult, it's no hierarchy where we're not going to honor both sides. So Dr. DeCruz, myself, Dr. Grant, will pull in those individuals, the students and the staff, and have a moment to just have that mediation or that restorative justice tone conversation. But I will say I found that helpful to have an appointed behavioral health coordinator or staff wellness coordinator to help with those activities. Another thing I wanted to say for the students, make sure your school is supported by the community, because you cannot do everything by yourself. So make sure you have a system that you can count on your wraparound supports, your community support workers, your CBI workers, your agencies, like really have agencies adopt your school and build that relationship. So when you are doing your day-to-day operations just for the school, you can depend on your partners to come in and help carry the load. And we have found that to be very, very helpful.
And I'll just add to continue with the conversation, that collaboration component is great. Miss Angela placed something in the chat that is very critical, that they're demoralized after constant negative feedback of those low test scores. So something that we do different, we don't do parent-teacher conferences, we do student-led conferences where our students are taking those conferences over and they're owning their own data. And that allows for them to be empowered about the great things that they're doing, right? When the teachers are consistently running those, it can appear that it is a session where the students are not getting their voice heard. And so we actually have our student like conferences next week, but that's an opportunity for them to look at their data, own their data, and said, hey, like this is what I'm doing really well with, and like these are the things that I still need to work on. And one thing that we've noticed that is that employing the student-led conferences, our students really kind of hone in on those individualized goals that they're setting, and they're more intentional about hitting those goals. And that's great for us because we're teaching our students to communicate. Be your biggest advocate. I put in the slide that we need to advocate for our students, but we also have to model and teach our students how to advocate for themselves. And if we're not consistently giving them those platforms and those voices to share that, they're never going to learn those skills necessary to continue that on well after they've left us at Monument Academy. When we're talking about collaboration in the classroom, it's easy for a teacher to say, this is my room and this is what we're going to do. Well, how are you building in or fostering that buy-in from the stakeholders, which are the students? And so I tell our teachers, let's remember that it's a collaborative process. when you allow for the students to understand where their concerns are, you as an adult working with them, you're giving them that voice to say, okay, I understand when I come in, I'm very disruptive. I come in and I'm very disruptive because I'm coming off a little bit more escalated from coming in from lunch and recess. So sometimes I just need a few minutes to kind of get myself together. The teacher knows the reason for their behavior. The student knows that they have those 5 minutes to kind of get themselves together, and together they're able to solve that problem and come up with an effective resolution where everyone gets what they need. And so continuing those collaborative conversations and allowing our students to know your voice is just as important when you're dealing with your concerns.
Any last questions from the audience? This has been phenomenal content. You all clearly have a very well thought out process where you are genuinely caring for your staff and your students. Please, everyone, know that we will continue to share through the trauma-informed education community of practice, schools that are pioneering this work, and that we know that we need to be here to support you, because teachers and educators are just taking on a tremendous amount, and there are very complex issues showing up in your classroom. Dr. Grant, any last words?
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. It's truly important for us to get the word about who we are and what we do. The reason I stress that it's important is because we have to identify best practices and partner with those who are willing to work with a segment of our population that is too often overlooked. That is a huge deal. We cannot let people suffer. We cannot let people fail. We need to do more, and we can do better. I'm hoping that all of you, which I believe because you joined us, are willing to do the work, and I'm sure willing to maybe jump in with you all as you are identifying practices and strategies to ensure that we are supporting all of our communities. And thank you again.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a good day and a good holiday.